AI without the risk, compliance best practices for financial professionals. I'm Johnny Swift of Impact Communications, and I'll be your host today for this insightful webinar featuring John O'Connell of the Oasis Group, Mark Gilbert of Zocks, Stacie Craddock of Integrated Compliance Advisors, and Jason Gross of Colorado's Division of Securities, where they're going to be discussing best practices for implementing AI tools while staying compliant. So I want to give a quick intro to each of our guests before we get started. So Mark Gilbert is founder and CEO of Zocks, a privacy-first enterprise-grade AI platform for financial advisors. And in the handouts section of your GoToWebinar control panel, you can find and download a recent white paper from Zocks and Integrated Compliance Advisors on how to ensure advisor compliance in the age of AI. So next up is Stacie Craddock, founder of Integrated Compliance Advisors, which is a compliance consulting firm delivering customized services, regulatory expertise, and ongoing support for independent advisory firms. Next up, we have Jason Gross, who's the Chief Examiner of the Division of Securities for Colorado's Department of Regulatory Agencies, and he wanted us to provide a quick disclosure for the audience. So his comments reflect his personal views. He does not speak for the commissioner, and his comments do not represent the official position of the Colorado Division of Securities. He nor the Colorado Division of Securities endorse any specific products or services, including those on today's webinar. And finally, John O'Connell is founder of the Oasis Group, a leading consultancy for the wealth management industry, which offers award-winning consulting services, industry-leading research, and compelling on-demand training. So thank you all for joining me today. And one other quick note before we jump in, we're going to hold all audience questions until the end, but please submit your questions in the chat box or the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll tackle them at the end of the conversation. So with that, I want to jump right into that conversation. And John, we're going to start with you. So how should financial advisors evaluate AI platforms from a data security and privacy perspective?
So the first thing that I would say is financial advisors need to have an AI acceptable use policy. You've got to set up some guardrails for your team about how they can use AI and educate them, for example, on not putting personally identifiable information, PII, into any AI model. The second thing that I would recommend is whatever tool you decide to use, whether it's one of the off-the-shelf tools, whether it's a specialty tool like Zocks, who's on this call today, or any of the other tools that you can find in this space. The second thing I would recommend is really do some due diligence around the use of the tool. You need to have a conversation with the software provider about what they use your information for. Now, many of the specialty tools that are created for the wealth management industry are well aware of the regulatory requirements that we have in the industry, and they do not share information, for example, to train your AI model, nor do they enable that information to be used broadly across the internet. However, if you're using any of the free tools or even some of the paid tools, like the large language models that are out there, Claude, Gamma, Perplexity, or any of those types of tools like ChatGPT, you need to be very well aware of the risk to your information that can be exposed by that model. In many of those cases, even a paid version of the model enables them to use your information to train their model moving forward, and can use the information for training purposes within their firm. What does that mean? It means if you put something into a paid model of one of these large language models, that information is out in the wild, as we say in cybersecurity. You have no control over who accesses that information because it can be used to train the internal staff of those companies. Only on the enterprise versions or on the corporate versions is your information truly secure. And those versions do come with a higher price point. So this all comes back to, you have to know where your information is going. You need to understand the EULA for some of these consumer-facing tools, or have a conversation with the provider of these tools, like a provider like a Zocks or one of those teams. And you need to train your team. Your team should not be uploading, for example, client investment statements to ChatGPT to be able to do the analysis. Although it could do that analysis quite well for you, you're actually putting your client's information out in the wild if you do that, even if you're using a paid version. So you need to really take care to educate your teams and provide those guardrails using an AI acceptable use policy.
So, Mark, for advisors who are just starting to explore AI tools, what questions should they be asking themselves and potential vendors?
Yeah, like the first thing at a very high level I would really recommend, and we talk with a lot of people every day, is frankly just, what are they trying to get done with the tool, right? Like what's the goal of it? Because I think AI, unlike a lot of other technologies, is in a great way very easy to play with. Like it's fun to experiment with, and you can do all these things, and people should do that. I think like that's a great thing to do. But ultimately, like are you trying to streamline part of your business? Or are you trying to get a better client experience? Like what are you trying to do? And I think if you know that, or at least have some ideas there, it makes it a lot easier to start to evaluate tools, start to evaluate systems, and frankly, even just like not get lost in, in the playground, if you will. And so I think also once you know that, the next thing for us really is, just as John was saying, like speak with the vendors. There's a number of platforms and applications that focus on the industry. And I would say at least the ones I know of, like generally are quite good with compliance and data retention and all those things. If it's outside of the industry or more of what we call a horizontal system, like definitely talk with them as well, but you have to be very thoughtful on like, where is that data? Who owns the data? All of those things. The key things that I would really recommend everyone kind of like ask and ensure, if you will, is like you need to own all of your clients' data. So, to John's point, if you upload something, if you have a conversation with someone, if you do anything, you need to be able to hit delete and have that be gone, or whatever it is. Like that firm shouldn't own your data, nobody else should own your data. Second thing is you do, just from privacy reasons and everything else, need to make sure that you can actually remove data, right? And that's a very important aspect. Again, I think actually I'm not sure if everyone in the industry is able to do that well. There's definitely a lot of, like, again, horizontal tools where it's actually very hard to go in and say, like, let's say Johnny, I'm working with you, right? Like, can I go through and remove Johnny's data if he asks me to, or if we need to for, whatever reason? And that is a core piece. And then I would also say along with that, is the training aspect. Like if they trained with your data, you can't remove it. Like it's in there, right? Like it almost kind of gets like woven into the fabric of the next release of that model. They do some things to try to prevent privacy issues and everything else, but like it kind of gets baked in, if you will. So I would say those are the big things. Like know what you're trying to get done, talk to the platform and vendors, and don't be shy. Like they should know the space, they should understand your questions. This is a very fast moving space, and so they should be helpful for you in that. And then kind of no matter what, make sure that you are controlling, that you have full control over your data and your client's data essentially for that.
So Jason, next one's for you. From a regulatory perspective, what are the most critical compliance considerations advisors should understand when implementing AI tools, and what are you seeing in your examinations at the state level?
Yeah, thanks. So let me paint a broad sort of backdrop first. And my perception is that Colorado tries to be a tech-forward state, and I'm all for tools that enhance compliance practices, add efficiencies. But what we want you to keep in mind is that the financial professional or the firm is ultimately responsible for the content that's being uploaded to AI, and then also how that AI is being used, keeping that human in the loop. Now, working for a consumer protection agency, my first inclination goes towards consumer protection. And I can give maybe 3 examples of how I see that. One of them, and John spoke about this earlier, is this element of data security and some privacy considerations. It's important to understand, what is it that you're uploading to this AI? Is this sensitive information? Is this client personal information? What is it that you're uploading? And then once it's uploaded, how's the AI storing that information? Is this being stored securely? And what is the AI doing with this information? Is it being trained on this information that you're uploading? These are some of the things that you heard earlier in this webinar. And if you're using a free version of AI, that's probably something that's going to be used for the training of that AI, going into the corpus, and want to be very careful about what you're uploading to those free platforms. And then, as John mentioned, even if it's a paid platform, you still want to understand, how is the AI going to be using this information that's uploading? Just because you're paying for it doesn't mean it has the type of security or is going to be used in a way that that you want it to be used. So it's up to the financial professional to really understand what is being stored, how is it being stored, and what's AI doing with this information. Second thing that comes to mind with AI platforms, and this is probably where we're seeing AI the most at the state examination level for investment advisors, is using AI for meeting note taking, summarizing a meeting and sending it to the client. That's sometimes collecting suitability, having AI collect suitability information. That's what we're seeing mostly now. And what I want people to keep in mind is that the financial professional is responsible for the accuracy of that information. So those notes that's summarizing a meeting that's going out to a client would need to be accurate. This is all part of your books and records. The suitability information that's being collected needs to be accurate. How do you do these things? Well, you review the output and, if necessary, make some adjustments. But ultimately, the professional is responsible for these note-taking summarizations and what the AI is generating to make sure that it's accurate and your books and records are accurate. The third element that comes to mind is when you're using AI for investment recommendations or maybe investment ideations, it's important that you check the output for accuracy. I'm going to give an example here, and I realize there's a big difference between an old school investment filtering system and machine learning, but I think that some of the concepts are similar. So if you're a financial professional and you're looking for maybe a mid-cap international fund, and you're going through a filtering system and the output you get is a S&P 500 index fund, well, something's not right. That hasn't quite lined up, and the financial professional should recognize that. It's the same with AI. If the output you're getting doesn't make sense, we would expect the financial professional to recognize that and not sort of just blindly trust the output of the AI.
So Stacie, we keep hearing the term human in the loop. Jason just mentioned it when it comes to AI generated content. I want to dig more into that. Can you explain really what human in the loop means and why it's so critical for books and records compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think regardless of what you're using the tool for, as they mentioned prior, the firm's ultimately responsible. So if you don't have human oversight on that tool, is it dropping things in your books and records that has maybe been recorded on a call? So for instance, if somebody said, well, I'm kind of unhappy with this, in the summary of notes, is that a formal written complaint? Could it be seen as something like that? So you really want to make sure you have somebody doing the human oversight of it, whether it's a marketing piece, inspirational piece, even the note takers on calls. You want to make sure you're reviewing those notes so nothing gets dropped into your books and records that is going to bring scrutiny on the firm later on by any regulator, or really in any kind of audit or exam. For instance, we also have marketing pieces that have been coming in, and they're completely AI generated. And with that, you can tell the ones that have had the human oversight, certain words have been replaced, dashes have been replaced, where you can tell when it's been modified. And if you don't have that human oversight, are you required to add a third party disclosure? Just stating that the information's been compiled from a third party source, may not be fully accurate, or are you fact checking that? Are you looking through to make sure? Yesterday I had one that said 70%. When I went out and I Googled the 70%, I couldn't find any source to cite on that 70%. So is it pulling hallucinations? It's just really important to still manage your business with that human oversight.
John, do you want to weigh in on this, on human in the loop? How do you recommend advisory firms keep their human in the loop, staff that within their firm?
Yeah, it's super interesting that Stacie brought up some of the writing style, right? So one of the things you're going to find with a large language model is it is always going to be grammatically correct. Most humans do not write grammatically correct, by the way. So the double dash that you see a lot of times in AI output, that's grammatically correct. I can count on like two hands how many people know what the double dash actually means in proper grammar. So the part of what you find with AI output is keeping that human in the loop that's reviewing the output, especially before it goes into any kind of books and records, is incredibly important. Also, you know, to reduce hallucinations, you need to have very well-structured prompts when you're using a large language model. So having a really well-structured prompt, you know, normally if your prompt is only 2 or 3 lines that you write, that's probably what is most akin to what's called the zero-shot prompt. You're not giving any guidelines, you're just asking it a question, and it's going to answer that question to its best of its ability. By the way, it's also going to answer that question somewhat supporting any kind of fact or bias that you've put in there. So if you put in, I think there's a high propensity of people using AI today in the wealth management space. It will hallucinate and give you back, yes, 80% of people use AI in the wealth management space. You need to have a much better prompt that asks for citations and specifically tells it not to make up any numbers, right? So those prompts tend to be much longer. As an example, many of the prompts that I use are usually 3 or 4 pages long, right? Because I provide very structured guidelines to get really good result sets. By the way, all of the AI vendors that have really good products, Zocks being one of them, almost all the note takers have really great solutions around this, the AI prospecting tools. If you were to look behind the scenes, the prompts that they're using are incredibly complex prompts that are being used to generate very accurate result sets. So if you're new to getting into this, having a human in the loop is very good. You need to have a human in the loop that is going to review all of the output, because from a compliance perspective, you're accountable for that output, okay? Not the machine, the human is going to be accountable for that output. So you need to make sure you have a human in the loop. And also, it comes back to what I mentioned in the beginning, right? You really do need to train your team to get great results out of this. Otherwise, you will generate hallucinations. You're going to generate bias in a lot of the responses. And the responses are going to smell like AI because they're using a double dash, which is incredibly grammatically correct, but not the way we write.
So true. So Mark, next one's for you. When AI moves from data capture into areas like generating recommendations or investment analysis, how does that change the compliance picture? And then can you also address the black box problem?
Yeah, that's a great question, and maybe I'll answer it in the opposite order, because I think the black box problem is part of the problem, if you will, with the first one. So just at a high level, like, you know, the concerns, if you will, in the landscape from a compliance point of view change drastically when systems start to recommend things, or, you know, there's a whole bunch of things there that frankly start to make it more complicated. The black box problem is, you know, if you go into, let's say, a ChatGPT and ask it a big question, right? Like, hey, do this, whatever, and then tell me this result, it kind of just comes back with the answer. And you can prompt it to give some other details along the way, but like that's generally what's kind of referred to as the black box problem. What you'll see out of I will say, kind of the leading platforms and the best platforms in this space, and what we're doing with a lot of firms, and definitely a lot of the larger firms that have a lot of kind of compliance controls in place, is you essentially need to remove that black box, right? And there's kind of 2 big aspects to that. One is anything that is done, you need to be able to essentially explain it, right? And say, like, okay, why, you know, like, why is this here? Why is this here? And then the other big aspect to that, which is related, is that you essentially need an audit trail the whole way through, right? And the reality is, most, especially large firms, but most firms have processes and procedures for, like, what if something was wrong, right? Like, what if someone literally was typing on a keyboard and just typed the wrong number or slipped a 0 or something like that? Like, if you think of that situation today in, you know, in finance, there's really a log of, like, yep, this happened, this is what came out of the client, this is what we said they would do, this is what we told them we were going to do, and then we did this other thing that whatever, one number was off. So you know where the problem hit. And humans make errors too, and so, like, it, you know, there are these procedures in place. The leading AI platforms are essentially getting rid of that. And I would say anybody who's looking at recommendations, analysis, or any of these things, you need these things in place to say, like, where did this data come from? And you need what we would call kind of the ingredients to that. So if it's starting to tell you about, let's say, like a, you know, a portfolio recommendation based for a certain client, like, you need to know, is this person a high risk, low risk, like what, and where is that coming from, right? Like, oh, we had a discussion with them and they are, you know, very nervous about losing any money. You're like, okay, great. You know, I know where that is. Why, you know, why was this recommended, or why was this recommended? And all of those essentially need, like, the root data and frankly audit logs to it. And I think it's going to be a little longer for those tools to get, and those systems frankly to get adopted, just because of that complexity. Like as Jason was mentioning, you see a lot of usage today in like client note taking and all that. And in our system and a lot of systems, I think like you can select any fact and say explain this, and it will go all the way back to like here's what the client said, here's what you said, or whatever those are. As you get into these other things, this gets much more complex, frankly, and that review is still required in it, right? And I think that will be the case for a while. We may end up in a situation in a few years where you frankly have AI, it sounds a little weird to say this, but AI almost reviewing the AI and being like, do we have all these pieces and are they connecting? For now and for a while, like the humans need to do that. And so, although it can still save you a whole lot of time as an advisor, because they are still very fast at generating these things, and our general review is like reviewing is a lot quicker than creating. It's definitely not like, you ask it something, click a button, and a bunch of output comes and it just starts to take action for you. You really have to be thoughtful about where is this data coming from. And frankly, your system should be able to outline that and make that very easy for you to do.
And if you're talking to one of your vendors, what Mark is referring to is commonly called traceability. So if you're having that conversation with the vendor, you need to be able to say to them, explain to me how you can show traceability in your result set. Just for nomenclature perspective, if you're out there having a conversation with the vendor, try to use that kind of phraseology. It'll resonate really well with a lot of vendors out there.
Mm-hmm.
So Stacie, another question for you here, and I think you kind of touched on this before, but I want to dig in a little bit deeper. But what compliance concerns arise when advisors are using AI to generate specifically marketing content? And like, what would you say are the red flags, and how does this relate to both the SEC and state marketing rules?
Yeah, so whenever we have marketing pieces come in, as we mentioned before, you can tell right away based on the writing style if it was human developed or if it was AI developed, and if it had that human touch on it. So that's kind of where we take it from the starting point. From there, I will go through and I will fact check it, because what I'm finding is because of those hallucinations, even if there's sources that are cited in there, if you click on them, sometimes they don't exist at all. They'll just take you to a page that's broken, or it'll give you links, but double check those links. Because just because there's a source there doesn't mean that source is valid. It's just another type of a hallucination. And then when it comes through, I think really reviewing the content. Are there words that are misleading? Are there, facts that can't be substantiated? So if you're using a percentage and you don't have that source, have you verified it? And really all the way down to the verification of with the SEC, the 7 prohibitions within the marketing rule. Have you reviewed the content for that? Or is your project built upon those rules? And really with any of the state's marketing rules. So when you're building this content in there, if you're not giving it those prompts to refer back to the rule or back to the state's rule, the content that it's creating, while it might sound wonderful, could be within those 7 prohibitions. So you need to have that. And then it needs to be fair and balanced, and it also needs to have disclosures. If you don't have the fair and balanced side of it, it makes everything sound wonderful, right down to a certain stock or a product. And what I've noticed from an AI standpoint, if you're writing an article, even on ETFs, it's not giving you the balance of what risks are involved unless you specifically ask it to. So within any compliance department, if you submit that kind of advertising, it's going to be rejected right away.
And how do you approach disclosures and disclosure statements and things like that with this type of content?
Really depends on what type of marketing you're doing. So within the rule, if you have testimonials, if you have endorsements, included in that, if you've added that to the AI content, if it's highlighting Google reviews or third-party rankings, are you including those disclosures? So for example, a third-party ranking where maybe it refers back to, the top Forbes advisors. Do you have that methodology attached to it? Because that is one of the requirements on the disclosures. If it's a testimonial, does it say whether it's been compensated, whether it's an actual client? And it's, that experience is unique to all different clients. It may not be your experience. So depending on what type of advertising it's creating for you, you need to review it for those disclosures.
Yeah. Jason, is there anything you want to add here about advisors using marketing content, from a state or SEC level within those marketing rules?
Well, I will say here in Colorado, our rule points right to the SEC rule, so it's not a separate rule. So the same prohibitions that would apply at the SEC level would apply at the state as well. And I think that a recent example that I have is actually someone who was not licensed. They were using AI to create their business cards, and those business cards were indicating that person, should be licensed based off what they were advertising. I think most people on this call are probably financial professionals, and may be licensed, but we are seeing some AI being used by people who are unlicensed and making business cards that make them appear that they're a financial advisor.
Yeah.
Wow. So, Colin, I'll ask you to start checking and see if we have any questions from the audience here in a moment, and then we can post some audience questions to you all. But John, I want to do a quick recap here and just get your top 3 things that you'd want every financial professional to know before implementing AI in their practice. I know it's a lot, but let's get your top 3.
I would say number 1, put together that acceptable use policy, get some guardrails up there, right? If your team doesn't have guardrails, if you're not giving them that kind of guidance, then they're almost likely to be off the reservation when you're dealing with AI. So you have to give them some guidance around it. Hand in hand with that, I would say get them trained. Like anything else, if you just put any tool into someone's hands without any training, it's likely that something bad could happen with it, right? So you definitely want to give them some training around it. You would never put an axe in someone's hand and go, just swing this around, it'll work out fine. So same thing with AI. Never assume that your team is going to just pick this up and use it appropriately. You've got to give them some guidance and training on it. The second big thing that I would say is, while you're educating your team on using the tools, be mindful of bias and hallucinations. If you're not aware of those and what they look like, you should become educated on those and then have an internal person, whether it's your chief compliance officer or whether it's another SME within your organization, that can help educate your team on how to look for bias and hallucinations, and then how to react to those bias and hallucinations. I wrote a pretty good set of articles on both of those to understand how to recognize those and look for them. So by all means, take a look at those articles, but get educated on that. And then the third thing is always maintain that human in the loop. Make sure that you are accepting the compliance responsibility that you have as a financial professional. It's going to be, at the end of the day, we hold people accountable for the use of their technology from a compliance perspective and from a legal perspective. So you need to make sure that you're protecting yourself and your firm by making sure that you have that human in the loop and they're truly looking at it. They're not just going, yep, this looks good and moving on. They have to truly look at it. Like Stacie brought up the example where a 70% number was put in there, or there was a hallucination where the link actually didn't point back to any supporting documentation on a number. That's where your team needs to go a little deeper. They can't just look and say, well, there's a link here, we're good. They've got to click on that, and they really need to double check to make sure that the AI output is solid. And then the last recommendation I would make is, as you're embarking on this, if you do decide to use one of the off-the-shelf tools like a Zocks, you're going to be in great shape with the education that they're going to give you. If you're using more of a large language model or one of the tools that are out there like Claude, Perplexity, ChatGPT, definitely understand what you're getting yourself into on the EULA. Make sure that your data is safe. And then get yourself some sort of prompt engineering training. Make sure that your team understands how to really use these tools. Zero-shot prompts are going to be great for quick answers, but those quick answers are usually prone with hallucination, bias, and quite frankly, compliance challenges.
So that's super helpful. Colin, are there any audience questions? Looks like we have a few. Do you want to chime in with the first one and pose that to our panelists?
Yeah, sure. So first one I have here, if we're using AI tools that store data in the cloud, what specific security certifications or standards should we be looking for?
Mark, you want to take that one first?
I'll take the first stab at that. We get this question, a lot as I'm talking with people. I frankly wish there was something where I'm like, if they have this checkbox, you're good, and that, like, I'll just say doesn't exist. Where I would start are typically SOC 2 Type 2 or ISO 27001. Those, you'll see those. Those are very helpful. What those mean is that the company has a whole set of policies established around like data security, access to client information, all that set up. I would make sure that they have that. I would make sure that it's audited and you can ask for that. So we regularly have clients ask for like, hey, can you send us your SOC 2? I think ours is like a 36-page report. It's not a light read, but get it. And I would say for compliance reasons, keep a copy of it. Like it shows that you're doing your work for it. And then, so like those are really the biggest two things, getting externally audited that. And then I would also I would talk to the team or whoever is at the firm and just ask them, like, how do you handle data security? How do you, like, who can access my data? And if they can't answer that very easily, then that's a pretty big flag too.
Yeah.
I'll add one other point there. Or Stacie, did you want to jump in with a point before I jumped in?
No, go ahead.
Let me add one other point to that. When you look at a lot of the data breaches, unfortunately, that have happened over the past couple of years, all of those firms had SOC 2 Type 2 audits, right? So you need to have a conversation, a little bit of a deeper conversation. The SOC 2 Type 2, I think, is table stakes. You need to make sure they have that. You do need to go beyond that and have a conversation with the vendor to say, hey, who on your team has access to my data? Do you have a third-party developer that may have access to my data? That's really where your risk is. In many cases, these firms are storing your data on, usually a Microsoft or an Amazon cloud capability or even Oracle cloud capability. All of those clouds are secure. They have SOC 2 Type 2. It's not the technology is not going to fail. A person's going to fail someplace in that data supply chain. So you need to have a conversation with the service provider and say, so, all right, my data is stored on your system. You're secure. Who has access to my data? Where's the failure point that's going to happen with? And you'll walk away with a much better understanding of the risks that are associated with you providing your data to that vendor. In the IT industry, we've become really good at going, not me. We've got tons of stuff that's going to monitor the environment. It's not going to be the environment that fails. It's going to be a person somewhere in that data supply chain that unfortunately has the failure.
Yeah. And I would like to add on to that, not me, because with the SEC, and I believe as well as with the state, on the vendor due diligence, are you looking at the agreement? Do you know, like you said, how that information is secure? But what if there is a breach? Who notifies the client? Who's responsible for making sure if there's PII in there and somebody has breached the system? And then have you indemnified that party, that AI tool, from being responsible for that breach? So it folds into so many different departments. It's not just the cybersecurity, but it flows into the agreements and every other department within a firm as well.
Agreed.
One last point, Johnny, just on that, and like this is a very high level one, and John mentioned this, like I think people have seen this, right? Like there are breaches, and there are frankly breaches like Microsoft, Amazon, like these breaches happen at frankly what I would probably describe as like kind of the most secure platforms. And one of the things to also just think about and ask them is like what data is actually getting stored, and as John said, who can see it, like both while it's getting processed and frankly, don't store copies of stuff you don't need to store copies of. It's just more exposure, right? It's like having whatever, more cars, more roofs, like anything like that. Like if you have more of it, you're just adding risk. So just be thoughtful about what you're keeping where, and almost never do you really want a lot of copies of it, right? Like you shouldn't have 3 vendors with the same data. It's just not a good idea.
It is if you want to play Russian roulette. It's fantastic. That's something you really want to do with your data.
Yeah, another question here, Jason. I'm gonna guess this one's for you. Is Colorado Securities implementing AI? If so, in what capacity?
Well, I think that in the future, everyone's going to be implementing AI. I think that, that train is probably somewhere on its way. I think right now what we're trying to figure out is how do we want to use AI? What policies and procedures do we want to develop around AI? And so we're at the very maybe beginning of this, and I have no idea what the future holds, but I have a feeling that everyone's going to be using AI in one shape or form.
Perfect. Next one here for the whole group. How detailed should our Form ADV disclosure be about AI usage?
Yeah, Jason, I'll let you take that one first if you want to touch on the state requirement.
Yeah, sure. And I guess that kind of depends on how the AI is going to be used. When I hear this question, what I'm thinking of is, if you're using AI for part of your method of analysis, when it comes to your investments, then I think we would expect to see in item 8 of the ADV 2A enough description around that to where it's accurate about how you're using the AI and that it's written in a way that a client can easily understand it. So that's where my mind goes to with this question.
Yeah, I would agree. If it's part of your item 8 in the ADV as far as your strategy and how you're evaluating strategies and objectives for clients, I think you have a disclosure obligation there. But more than that, if you're using it as a note taker or you're recording, meetings and things like that, do you have client consent to do that? And a lot of times now we're seeing it, we're adding it to the client agreements, to their investment advisory agreement.
I'll add one other quick point to that. Stacie brought up know your agreement with your vendor, right? As we continue through 26, you're going to see a lot of your incumbent vendors beginning to add AI capability into their tool set. For example, I was recently on another webinar where we were discussing using artificial intelligence to identify tax loss harvesting opportunities. That's going to be, if you're using AI, and you're going to see this coming into a lot of the incumbent vendors, where they're going to be leveraging AI to identify opportunities for the advisor, some of which might be tax loss harvesting. That's going to require a completely new set of disclosures, I think, that are going to need to be in your ADV. And certainly you need to evaluate those. So one caution that I would say is, for the next year to 2 years, you really need to be kind of in lockstep with your existing providers to understand what AI enhancements they're making. It may not be implementing an AI specific tool like Zocks. It might be that one of your incumbent vendors, like your portfolio management system, is now leveraging AI to make suggestions to the advisor. And there may be a compliance obligation associated with that. So be diligent on what the changes and the enhancements that are happening in your existing systems. Bring your compliance and legal team into those conversations so that it's not only a tech conversation where we're just going to upgrade. You need to make sure your compliance team and your legal team are aware of what some of those changes are to determine whether or not there is an additional disclosure that you're going to need to make in your ADV.
Yeah. And then just to add on to that, it just occurred to me when you were speaking, John, the privacy policy.
Yes.
If you implement a tool, is it now crossing over in your privacy policy as well? And a lot of them are so state specific that you would want to check, the state requirements for disclosure on that as well.
One more thing is, we're moving into a new world. If your incident response plan, again, just to touch on the cybersecurity one more time, your incident response plan is going to need to evolve, right? It's going to need to evolve with the evolving threats that we're seeing around deepfake threats that are out there, which are being primarily propagated through AI. And it's going to need to evolve with AI responses, right? If an algorithm does provide a hallucination, that needs to be in your incident response plan. And today, most incident response plans are covering more like a disaster recovery plan. Like, if our computers go down, what happens? If we don't have access to the office, what happens? You need to evolve those plans to continue evolving with the new reality that we're living in.
Mm-hmm. I see another, oh, sorry, go ahead, Stacie.
One last thing to touch on is, if you do add an AI tool this year, make sure it's in your annual review. What technology did you add to your platform?
I see another related one here, and it says if we're duly registered, do we need to follow different AI compliance rules for our state versus SEC clients? And Jason, you had said that Colorado pretty closely follows SEC, but it probably varies state to state, I would guess.
Yeah, and I was speaking in regards to the marketing materials. I don't know how broad this question is. What I would say is the concept, there's probably a pretty wide overlap on the concepts, whether you're Reg Rep, IAR, and you know, that is knowing what is it you're uploading to the AI, how's the AI using it. I think it's pretty wide overlap on whether you're Reg Rep or IAR.
Mm-hmm. All right, Colin, you want to tee us up with the next one here?
Yeah, sure. If a regulator requests our books and records, do they expect to see the raw AI output or just the final reviewed version?
Yes, this one's directed at me. And I can't speak for all regulators, certainly. But from my perspective, this is a little bit facts and circumstance specific. So if it's part of your books and records, then the regulator may be asking for that. So for example, if you're using an AI platform that is taking notes and at the end of the meeting, it shoots it right out to your client, and later you realize that there's some mistakes in there and you make some type of edit, I think we would expect that original communication out to your client to be retained in your books and records. So in that instance, yeah. If maybe you are developing your policy and procedure manual, and as part of that iteration before it's finalized, you're using AI for some type of review in there. I'm not sure a regulator would ask for that, but maybe in some cases they would. To me, that just seems it's just sort of like an internal iteration as you're developing your finalized written supervisory procedure. So if it's part of your books and records, yeah. But I think the best thing to do would be to ask that regulator if they want to see it or not. They'll tell you.
Mm-hmm. Looks like we have one last question here, Colin.
Yeah. Can AI generated content ever be considered testimonials or endorsements under marketing rules?
It really depends on where you're referring to. If you have the AI content and you ask it to, review to that or refer to that third-party ranking, yes, it can. If it's speaking about your Google reviews, yes, it can. So it can cross over in that to where it incorporates the testimonials and endorsements, and you've entangled yourself in that.
Well, that looks to be it. And this was a fantastic, super insightful discussion. Thank you all for joining us. For all of our attendees here today, don't forget to check out the handout, which is a white paper from the Zocks and Integrated Compliance Advisors teams, and for additional insights there. And again, thanks so much. Anything else you want to add in closing, John?
The only thing I would say is that the Oasis group did do a review of the AI note taker capabilities that were out there. We put a lot of the tools through the test. Zoc came up very, very well in our tests. So if you have not made a decision on an AI note taker yet, I would encourage you to go take a look at that research. I think you're going to find it very insightful. We do cover the accuracy, the security that you see coming out of those tools, and there are some great results there. You can definitely save a lot of time for your firm by implementing one of these tools. And the tools that are specific to our industry do significantly better than the generic tool set that's out there. I do not recommend that you implement a generic tool set. I do recommend that you implement one of the tools that were created for our industry for all the reasons that we talked about on this phone: security, compliance capabilities, accuracy. So I would say go take a look at the study and make a good decision.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thanks to all of our attendees for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye,
everyone.